Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Eating the Elephant, where we talk about Hurricane Michael recovery. We talk about insurance help, a few recovery tips for you, and we break down this giant elephant that is hurricane recovery. We try to break it into bite-sized pieces for you. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about panic, and I have to be honest, it's a little frustrating and discouraging sometimes that I spend a lot of time on the subject of panic. In its simplest form, panic is simply a loss of rational thought. And I think a lot of us have suffered that since the storm at one point or another. And sometimes it's due to being overwhelmed, confused. We feel like we don't know the process, the language. We're afraid of getting taken advantage of, and we're afraid that we're not going to get back where we want to be. It could be something as simple as a lost pet that triggers it, or all the trees in your neighborhood being down, in the case of my wife. So I do want to talk about panic. And I want to talk about a couple of specific reasons that I'm seeing some panic. First, I do want to say thanks to Pat Saveston. Again, I've said this before, but as much as I've done my best to help other people navigate the post-Michael recovery, and I add to it where I can, she's been an immense help in helping me do that. So I want all of you out there to know that Eating the Elephant probably wouldn't exist without two people. One, of course, is my wife, and the other is Pat. And if you happen to see Pat or know her, thank her, because she has as much to do with Eating the Elephant as I do. Getting back to the panic, I'd like to say that there are two things that I see bandied about there by contractors that are making people get a little bit twitchy. One is the term Category 3 water, and the other is mold, in particular black mold. And I want to start with water. I want to give you just a little bit of a primer on this. Because a lot of people will talk to a contractor, particularly one that might not be the most scrupulous, and say, oh, you've got a Category 3 water problem. Well, let me explain to you what that really means. Water is really kind of broken down in this context into three different categories. One is clean water, the stuff that comes out of your tap that you can drink. There are no health issues, no poisons, no bacterial elements. It is suitable for human consumption. Category 2 water is what I think folks would commonly refer to as gray water. It is the kind of stuff that comes out of your shower drain. If you are an RV person, you know the difference between supply, which is clean water, and gray water, and then black water, which we'll get to in a minute. But gray water isn't inherently dangerous. It's certainly not something you'd want to drink, but it is not necessarily one of those things that would have an awful lot of bacterial elements or be something that's poisonous or overly dangerous. It could be rainwater runoff in some cases, things such as that. It's fresh water, generally speaking, and not salt water, because salt water we're going to leave to the side. It's a whole different set of elements, and it's not something that I generally have seen as being a problem because we haven't had a great deal of flooding. The third Category 3 water is what's known as black water, more commonly, and that is something that is dangerous and is a health risk. It may contain raw sewage, E. coli, just all kind of bad stuff. It could be stuff that's chemical that could be dangerous to you, or again, it could just be biological. And either way, you don't want any part of that. Where I'm seeing some misplaced panic with this is particularly, we had an example about 2 weeks ago where we had someone that was going to go in and tear out all of the ceiling in a home, do an awful lot of extremely invasive and complicated and very expensive mold work. That may need to be done. And I'm not a mold certified guy, so I'm a little bit reticent to weigh in some cases. But in this particular case, the person was talking about Category 3 water in the attic. I found this a little bit suspect, and what had happened is exactly what happened at my house. The wind came through, our roof structure was intact, although we did have to have a new roof for some other reasons, and the soffit was blown out from under the eaves, and you put 160-mile-an-hour winds carrying water at the house, and some of that rainwater is going to get upstairs and get in your attic. That's what happened with us. We had we did have some ceiling damage, not terrible, but the first thing we did, of course, is get all the insulation taken out. But it never occurred to me that we would have a Category 3 water problem, and we certainly did not. And it seemed unlikely to me in this particular circumstance it was brought to me that Category 3 water or black water would be a problem. So if someone uses the term Category 3 water and is unwilling to fully explain it and explain how it could be affecting your home, you need to that could be a potential red flag. So Category 3 water, black water, if it got into your home, if something backed up in your home, certainly that's an issue and you need to be very concerned. But if you got rain in your attic and somebody's trying to tell you that's a Category 3 water problem, chances are you need to show them the door and let them move along. You can get to the next contractor. Similarly, and even more often, we're hearing an awful lot about mold these days. Mold is a fact of life in Florida. You got a lot of heat, you got a lot of humidity, you got a lot of dark spaces. That's perfect for mold to grow. There is mold in the air all around you every single day. Some people are more sensitive to it than others, but just because you have mold in your home, you had mold in your home before the storm. You may not have had dangerous mold in your home before the storm. And what I have seen that is confusing people, and I want us to address, is you'll get an air quality report from some mold testing company, and they will bring you a report that tends to be very extensive, very literate, a lot of technical terms, a lot of big words that you don't understand, and tons of numbers. Having the data is always good. I've said to you over and over, I'm a data-driven guy, and I like to see the data, but I have to understand the data and know what it means. And if there's 44 parts per billion of some item that is got a name this long that I can't even pronounce, that doesn't give me useful information. Information by itself isn't helpful unless you can understand it and make use of that information. So what I would say to you is, if you get a mold report, you need to understand what's in it. I personally do not, so I'm not the guy to ask. I'll be the first to tell you. We did not get a full mold report on our home. I didn't feel like it was necessary. What we did do is we did get a third-party inspection from someone, I've mentioned it 100 times, and I'll send you names if you need them, from somebody that was mold certified. He took a look around and he was able to evaluate very quickly whether we had a problem that we should be worried about. One of the things he did tell me is there's a pretty big distinction. If you look in your home and you see discoloration on your ceiling or on a wall, that indicates moisture certainly, or moisture had been present even if it's not. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a black mold problem and a health risk. That's something that you need to have evaluated. But if somebody simply sees a water stain in your home and start screaming black mold and throwing their hands up, again, I think they're trying to get you to panic and spend money with them, and I think you need to be very cautious with them and get another opinion. That said, black mold is a very different beast as I understand it, and again, I'm not an expert, so I would encourage you to find someone much smarter than me in this area and ask questions if it applies to you. But black mold is very specific. The spores are very small. The only time I've seen black mold was a photo of a condo unit that we insured that had been sealed for 18 months. And there were stalactites, actually. It looked like little bitty tiny grains in these big columns hanging down from the ceiling. It was unbelievable. But if you leave something in a high moisture environment like we have, untouched for 18 months, with all of the blinds pulled and the AC unit turned off, that's something I think you'd have to expect would be black mold. So the color I think is particular, and I don't remember the number here, but somebody that I spoke to up in South Carolina, an old friend of mine from college, said something that I'm going to make the numbers up, but something like 20,000 different species of mold. It's some ridiculously high number. And there was a relatively small number, just a handful of those, that were really dangerous to humans. Most of it is stuff we live with every day. So just because someone says you have mold in your home, yes, you do. You live in Florida, you had mold in your home before the storm. So make sure you understand the kind of mold, and just because you get information and get data and get long scientific names for stuff that's in your home, that doesn't mean it's time to panic. It means it's time to go to school. It's time to learn about the data that you have, and it's time to learn whether that is a problem in your house or not. And you need to learn whether a little bit of bleach and a little bit of elbow grease will do the trick, or that you need to hire a professional and spend some big money. So again, don't panic. When you panic, loss of rational thought. You do not panic. What you do is you go to school. When you have one of these problems and you think you have a Category 3 water or black mold problem, what is your voice? You do not panic. What you do is you go to school and you learn what you've got. And you deal with it however you need to. I want to close with something that will be a little bit different. It's not a panic item, but I'm going to talk a little bit about this on Wednesday and probably moving into the future. There's two kinds of insurance in its simplest form. There's good insurance and there's cheap insurance. And I think a lot of people are learning that there is a big difference between the two. And I said something sort of like this before. I think everybody understands innately value in many, many things that you buy. If you go out and buy a Mercedes or a Jaguar, it's very easy to recognize that value is very different than if you buy a Kia. You might be able to drive a Kia, it might be a good car, but no one would say that's an equivalent to a Mercedes. So I think people can recognize that. That's something you can see with your eyes. It's something that's very evident to everyone, and it's something that shows up in the price tag. There are people that drive Kias. There are people that would prefer to drive a Mercedes. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Where I'm having trouble these days is that there are people that pay for a Kia expecting to drive a Mercedes, or there are people that think they have purchased a Mercedes and realize that they're driving a Kia after the storm. You need to understand both your price point and the quality of your coverage, and that's incumbent upon you. It is certainly partially your agent's job to explain that to you, but you have to give them the time and attention for them to explain it to you. So what I would suggest you do is, first of all, go to school, as I just said, and spend a little bit of time with your insurance provider and find out more about the coverage that you have, and find out where you are on that Kia versus Mercedes sort of continuum. When you do that, you'll be a much better prepared client, and you'll be a much better prepared claimant should you have another claim, we have another storm or something like that, or even if you unzip a pipe or have a fire in your home, you'll better understand what you have, and you will purchase the coverage that you want and expect instead of what's just thrown at you. So again, the problem that you have is you put a Kia next to a Mercedes, the differences between the two are very quickly evident. You can recognize those very, very fast. The problem is if you lay a good policy next to a poor policy, that's not nearly as evident. You need some help to look through that. You need to spend some time and effort to figure out which is which and see which is the Mercedes and which is the Kia, because the cover pages look much the same. I'm going to leave it there. I appreciate your attention once again this week. If you have any questions, shoot them to me via direct message here on Facebook or email them to trey@huttinsurance.com. Hope you have a nice Sunday evening, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks.